All right, so much art history and never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. Okay, the next artist I want to introduce you to is Diego Rivera. He's part of the La Tres Grandes. To look at his artwork or one of his artworks, we're going to go to New York and then we'll go to the city of New York and we'll go to Manhattan. And right here, just south of Central Park, is Rockefeller Center, number 3, right there on this map. If you don't know who the Rockefellers are, they're like the Donald Trumps of the 1930s, right? And they had tons of money, and they built this building and named it after themselves. And in their main entrance of their building, they have this massive wall. So the commission was to paint a mural in the middle of Manhattan's Rockefeller Center. Rivera was asked to show a man at the crossroads, looking with uncertainty but with hope and high vision to the choosing of a course leading to a new and better future. This was to be called New Frontiers. So he makes this sketch, it gets approved, and he starts painting it. And he gets to this part of the painting and he gets fired. Yeah, why? What's so bad about this painting? Do you see anything wrong with it? It's full of communist imagery. Right. So this is as far as he got before he was fired and the mural was destroyed and painted over. It had a lot of communist propaganda in it. One war had just ended, another one was looming on the horizon, and the stock market had crashed by this time. There was 25% unemployment, and so people gravitated towards extreme political views. Communism gained a lot of popularity, and Rivera was a communist. In 1922, he joined the Communist Party. The reason why he painted this stuff in here, because it wasn't part of the original plan, is that he's a communist, but he's working for the most famous capitalists ever. So his communist friends are telling him that he's a hypocrite for working for the capitalists. So he says, "All right, then I'll put in some communist stuff in here," and then he gets fired. So he's hated by his friends. He gets fired from his job. By this time, he had done this tour of painting murals in America. This was his third mural. He decides, you know what? I've spent enough time in America. I'm going to go back to Mexico, and he paints the mural that he got fired from in Mexico City. It is opposite of the painting that I showed you yesterday, but let's take a closer look at it. This is the painting right here. It's called Man, the Controller of the Universe, or Man and the Time Machine. This painting is a powerful representation of the human race at the crossroads of competing forces and ideologies. The competing forces are science, industrialization, communism, and capitalism. At the center of this is the heroic worker, surrounded by 4 propeller like ellipses. So let's take a look at the worker here. And just down below him, we have this hand holding a sphere. Now, I was doing some research on this, and they said that this is a reflection of a control panel. But I don't agree with that because it's this thing right here. Does that look like cell division to you? Right? That's cell division. So if this is cell division, then I think these things are different elements or atoms. You can have like there's an atom with one ion. Is that right? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but there's different. I guess these are elements up here, and so that's what makes me think that this is all about science and not a reflection of a control panel. All right, now there's 2 ellipses behind him. And so in this one right here, what do you see in this ellipse? Yeah, see, there's planets and the sun, and it looks like galaxies are forming. So these are big things. And then if we look at the other ellipse, what do you see in the other ellipse? If we get closer, it looks like cells. All right, these are little things. So we have big things versus little things, right? And then on the far right and the far left, we have these lenses. And they're placed quite nicely compositionally. They keep us within the artwork. But you use lenses for telescopes for looking at big things, and then you use lenses for microscopes for looking at small things. And then over here in the upper left, we have technology that's used for war. So we have the planes and the gas masks and the weapons and the tanks. Over on the right side, we have some communist imagery. There's Lenin's tomb, and there's a bunch of people wearing those red scarves or those red hats for a revolution. I think this is a reference to the revolution, the communist revolution in Russia. And then on the left and the right, we have these really large paintings of statues. Here we have Zeus, who's wearing a rosary bead and a cross. And the message here is that Christianity is just as silly as the ancient myths are. Rivera was an atheist, and so he's making that all religions are just as silly as each other. Then on the right, we have a sculpture that is holding a fascist. All right, that object that I just showed you from the other painting with a swastika on it. Here we have a portrait of Lenin, and there's a portrait of Trotsky and Engels and Marx. These are all famous communists. And then over on this side over here, we have this group of the elites that are having a great time. Look, they're drinking and smoking, dancing, playing cards, and they're just living it up. While outside, people are miserable and not working. And here we have cops beating up the protesters. They're not having a good time at all. Then to the left of them, we have Darwin, who is teaching people about science and history. And then we have students down here that are of all mixed races that are learning together. And if we get close to her, she has a breast tumor and she's getting radiation for that. It's a sign that science is helpful. All right, now we're going to go to Michigan. Where is Michigan? That's right, D. Yeah, third period couldn't find it. They guessed everything but D. All right, you can always tell Michigan because it looks like a mitten. All right, and we're going to go to the Detroit Institute of Fine Arts. And inside this Institute of Fine Arts is this room, which we're going to visit. We're going to look at all these paintings. All right, he was asked to create a mural to promote the industry of Detroit. What is Detroit's main industry? Or what was it in the 30s? Cars, that's right. Detroit is famous for its cars. So he went to the factories where they were making the cars and he watched the workers and he made sketches. And this is his sketch for the final mural for the north wall. All right, so when you first come into this room, this is the wall that you are facing. This is the east wall. And up in the corner, we have some paintings that are kind of interesting. I do want to point out before we get too close, we have the baby that's inside of this, almost like a pod with roots growing out of it. And then over here, we have a couple of plows that are plowing through the landscape. We see the baby growing inside of a plant cell or a plant pod. And then we have these two women that are up in the corners. The woman on the right represents South America because she has corn. And the woman on the right represents North America because she has apples. And then on the opposite side of those two women, we have some other paintings of, let's see if we get a little bit closer. If we look up at the top, there are some airplanes. And the airplanes on the left are peaceful. The airplanes on the right are for the military. we can look at these peaceful plains, and you can see how the painting continues past the architecture of the room. And then underneath the peaceful airplanes is a dove, and then underneath the military airplanes is a hawk that's eating the doves or chasing the doves away. And then down below, there's a couple of paintings down here, right here and right here. You can see a couple of guys with these working these large machines. And I want to focus on that guy right there. If you look at what he's wearing and what he's holding, what do you notice? Yeah, the red star. What is that a symbol of? Yeah, it's communism. And he's holding the hammer, right? Yes, yeah, right. There's some communist imagery. However, yeah, so however, the makers of the gloves in Detroit, their symbol is a red star, and he's just working on. So I don't know. Is it communist? Is it not? Don't know. Here, I want to look at these main paintings right here. If we get all right, so this is the north wall, and this is the south wall. If we look up above on these two walls, the idea was to show the four figures as equals, and these are the four different races. And the hands are coming out to hold the riches of the earth. So each race contributes to the raw materials that makes up the automobile. There's iron ore, there's coal, there's sand, and limestone. In one of these other little panels, Diego Rivera paints himself. This is him up here. And you can see the workers. Look, what color is their skin? Yeah, it's like this yellowy green. They're getting sick from working in the factory. So they are sacrificing themselves for the sake of industry and capitalism. Then up here, we have some science going on. In the upper right, this is the vaccinations. And then upper left, we have some bombs that are being made. But so this doctor is giving vaccinations to the child. And look at how closely this looks like a nativity scene. She could be Mary, he could be Joseph, and then these three scientists up here that are working on making vaccines are like the three wise men. We have the cow and the horse inside the laboratory. On the other side, we have so the message here is technology is being used to save lives. Right, vaccines get rid of diseases, and then here we have technology is being used to take lives. These guys up here are making bombs. These guys down here are making chemical weapons. And then in one of the murals, we have an overseer who is looking over what the workers are working on. And then if we look at this mural right here, look at that big machine on the right. Does that look at all familiar to you? It does look like Star Wars, yeah. It looks a lot like the Coatlicue. I need to work on my pronunciations for that. And then we have these people coming to visit and watch the workers as they assemble the cars. Notice that all of these people look like they have money. They're wearing the hats, they're dressed well, and they're all light-skinned Caucasians looking at the workers who are all mixed races. So this is a communist message right here. It's separating the high class from the low class. Here we have a couple more scenes of science. We have in the upper left panel, we have the pharmaceutical industry. In the upper right panel, we have the chemical industry. And it's showing the good and the bad of technology. And then I want you to notice these scenes that are down here. All right, these are just like predellas. So what's a predella? When you have an altarpiece, these little images down below, that is the predella. And so that's what we have here. So they're painted in for sale. And here we have workers coming in to work. And then we have workers that are being trained on the engines and how to make the engines. By the way, this engine right here looks a lot like ancient Mexican pottery of a dog. And then we have the workers going home at night after the shift is over. Okay, we are going to go back to Mexico City. And if we look at a map of Mexico City, right in the middle of the city, there is a park called Alameda Central. And this park is so old that it used to be an Aztec marketplace. And it was officially established as a park in 1592. It is the oldest park in all of the Americas. Here's a photograph of the park in the 1940s from an airplane. So if you look down, it looks a lot like Central Park. If you ever looked at photographs, aerial photographs of New York City, you look down and you can see Central Park. Well, Mexico City has a park very similar to that. In fact, it's even older. So here's a photograph from nowadays, and it looks like there was either some kind of festival or protest or something, because you can see lots of people in this photo. My point is, this park has been around for a very long time. Across the street from this park, there was a hotel, the Hotel del Prado, and they commissioned Diego Rivera to paint a mural of based on the park. And so in the upper left, that photograph shows him sketching out the mural. In the lower left, you can see a photograph of the mural. And then on the photograph on the right, you can see people dining in the hotel with the mural in the background. But unfortunately, unfortunately, there was an earthquake in 1985 that did a lot of damage to the hotel. The hotel had to be demolished. So they rescued this mural and relocated it to a museum. So this gives you a sense of how large the mural is. It's a big one. And here's a view of that mural. The subject of this mural is Mexican history. And it's quite a crowded composition with lots of people in it. It's a mixture of meaningful portraits, historical figures, and symbolic elements. In some parts, the artist shows his own childhood experiences. In some parts, we have historical events and sites that took place in the park. And this is the same park which the Spanish Inquisition would burn its victims during the times of Cortez. It's also the same park where the U.S. Army set up camp in 1848. And there's been major political demonstrations at this park going all the way back to the 19th century. So it goes chronologically from left to right. On the far right, we have the modern post-revolutionary Mexico. This is on the far left, and in the background, you can see the Church of San Diego. And then you have, on the far right, you can see in the background, you can see modern Mexico City. There's some things to point out in this mural. Over here, we have the subjugation of Mexico's indigenous population. Over here, we have the years of Spanish rule. And then in this area, we have the bloody war for independence. We have decades of dictatorship shown by Porfirio Diaz. And then we have the revolution of the 1910s here. And then we have the stability of the mid-20th century. Couple people to point out, on the very far left, we have Cortez. And then, like I pointed out before, Porfirio Diaz. And then in the center is this curious figure right here. This is the most celebrated of Guadalupe's creations. By the way, Guadalupe Posada is was like a cartoonist, and he created this figure, and it's known as the Calavera Catrina, and it's a symbol of Mexican pop culture. But just to Katrina's right is a self-portrait of Diego Rivera as a boy. So he painted himself as a child. And just behind him, he painted his wife, Frida Kahlo. And in her hand, she's holding a yin-yang symbol. But it's the Eastern equivalent of the Aztec idea of duality. So let's jump from her to, let's take a look at Frida Kahlo now. So she deviated from traditional portrayal of female beauty in art. And instead, she chose to paint raw and honest experience. She managed to make virtue out of adversity. She made astonishing original art out of her pain. She was a female artist who was disabled in a male dominated art world in post revolutionary Mexico. And she was a feminist icon who broke all social conventions and produced some of the most haunting and visionary images of the 20th century. This is a photograph of her as a child when she was 6 years old. She had polio, which meant she had a crooked foot, and she was teased by the other children and called names like Peg Leg Frida. When she was older in 1922, she accepted the elite national preparatory school, where she was accepted to it, where she focused on natural sciences with the aim of becoming a physician. And Diego Rivera, came to the school to paint a mural, and that is the mural that he painted. And this is the first time that Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo met. She was 15 and he was 35. And she asked him some advice on a painting that she was working on. And that was it for this encounter. On 17th of September 1925, Kahlo and her boyfriend, Arias, were on their way home from school. They boarded one bus, but they got off the bus to look for an umbrella that Kahlo had left behind. Then they boarded a second bus, which was crowded, and they sat in the back. The driver attempted to pass an oncoming electric car, and the streetcar crashed into the side of the wooden bus, dragging it a few feet. Several passengers were killed in the accident, and while Arias suffered minor injuries, Frida was impaled with an iron handrail that went through her pelvis. She later described the injury as the way a sword pierces a bull. The handrail was removed by Arias and the others, but she had many other injuries. Her pelvic bone had been fractured. Her abdomen and uterus had been punctured by the rail. Her spine was broken in 3 places. Her right leg was broken in 11 places. Her right foot was crushed and dislocated. Her collarbone was broken, and her shoulder was dislocated. She spent a month in the hospital and 2 months recovering at home before being able to return to work. As treatment, she had to wear a plaster corset, which confined her to bed rest for a better part of 3 months. And the accident ended Kahlo's dreams of becoming a physician and caused her pain and illness for the rest of her life. Now, I want you to look at this image right here. This is not by Kahlo, but this is what they call an ex voto. And these are inexpensive paintings by amateur artists on small panels of 10. These are usually deeply personal images, and they're usually thank you messages to saints for answering a prayer, or sometimes they tell a story. So remember this for later. While she was in the hospital, to pass the time, she started painting. Her mother bought her paint, and her father made her a special easel for her to paint with. They put a mirror on the ceiling so she could paint herself. And many of her paintings are small because she painted them in bed. Here's a quote by Frida. Quote, "I paint myself because it is what I am most familiar with," unquote. Years later, she began to socialize again. She began to go to parties, and she met Rivera again and asked him to look at her art. He encouraged her to continue making art, and at that time, she was 20 and he was 40. And he began to visit her a lot. Yeah, they started a relationship. A year after that meeting, he put her in this painting right here, where it shows her giving weapons to the revolution. They both joined the Communist Party in 1922, and they got married when she was 22 and he was 42. Her parents were against it. They called it the elephant and the dove. Others called it a bizarre Beauty and the Beast. But this romance, this marriage was one of the most obsessive and tumultuous relationships in art history. Their infatuation, passion, and devotion was matched by jealousy, anger, and betrayal. Both of them had numerous extramarital affairs. He had affairs, and she had affairs, and not just with men. Yeah, all right. I talked to you guys about when Diego Rivera did murals around the nation. And when I showed you the Detroit mural up here, and I showed you the New York mural that he was fired from, that was up here. And there was another mural that he did in California. But they spent a long time in America, traveling from one place to another and working on these murals. She had two miscarriages. Two of her three miscarriages were from this trip. The third pregnancy was terminated due to health problems. And she had an operation on her leg, and several toes were removed during this time in America. So she was having a rough time in America. So she decided to let him stay in America, let him paint, and she was going to go and do her own thing. So she spent some time away from Diego, and during this time, she became famous on her own. She had her own solo shows, and she even was on the cover of Vogue magazine. Diego had an affair with Frida's sister, and that was the last straw after the many affairs that they were both having. And so she divorced him, and when they were separated after the divorce, they missed each other, and they got married again a year later. That guy on the right, that is Leon Trotsky, and he is a Russian communist who opposed Stalin. Trotsky was the leader of the Russian army during World War One, and he was a friend of Lenin, and he was the leader of the Russian Revolution. But he spoke out against his rival, Stalin. His dislike of Stalin was seen as disloyalty to the party. So when Stalin rose to power, he exiled Trotsky. In the 30s, Stalin began a great purge. He was assassinating all his political rivals. So Mexico granted asylum to Leon Trotsky, and Trotsky fled to Mexico to escape the Great Purge, and he lived with Diego and Frida for 2 years. And he had an affair with Frida Kahlo, and he moved out after he started fighting with Diego. But he was assassinated in Mexico. And do you guys remember Siqueiros? He was part of a failed assassination attempt on Trotsky. So there's a lot of chaos going on in Mexico at the time. And here's a photograph of Diego and Frida signing their second marriage certificate. But they were very lonely without each other, and they missed each other, and that's why they remarried again. When asked about Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera said, "She was the great fact of my life." Does that sound like somebody who's in love? Right? Shouldn't it be that she was the great love of my life? When asked about Diego, she said, "There's been two accidents in my life. One was the streetcar, and the other one was Diego." All right, but for the rest of her life, she made lots of art. She had over 30 operations during her life, and she was constantly in pain. Of the 143 paintings by Kahlo, 55 of them are self-portraits. I used a little calculator, and I calculated that was 38%. She was very influenced by ex voto paintings, and she liked how they used allegory and a narrative in their artworks. So she's kind of combining ex voto style of art with 19th century Mexican portraiture. Now, these Mexican portrait artists are usually good enough artists, but they did not have formal training. If you look at this painting right here, you can see the difference than the European paintings that we've seen in the past, especially right around like the neoclassical era. Just think about that blue satin dress that was so incredibly amazing. These are good portraits, but they're not amazing. They're good enough. But she likes how they have the blank expression and a stiff artificial pose. They have a flat, rigid quality. And then she also likes the expressionless look on martyred saints. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this painting right here. It's called The Two Fridas. It's almost life-size, and it's Kahlo's largest painting. Almost all of her paintings were small. Why were they small? Yeah, she did a lot of them in bed, and she just got used to that size. Yes, absolutely. Why did she do a large painting? So she was told that large paintings sell for more money. So she tried a large painting. Kahlo says, "This shows Frida that Diego loved and the Frida that he hated. Now, there's two Fridas here. Can you tell the difference between the two? What are the differences between the two Fridas? Right. It's what she's wearing. That's the biggest difference. And so the one on the left is wearing a white dress. The one on the right is wearing a blue and yellow and green dress. All right. So what do you think is the difference between the white dress and the other dress? Yeah, it does look like a wedding gown. All right. And I would say it'd be safe to assume that this is a fancy dress, and then this one over here is not. Right. It's casual. Yes. Frida, she comes from both European and indigenous parents. All right. Her father is a European Spaniard and her mother is indigenous. So she is representing both sides of her history here, her European side and her Mexican side. Oh, and by the way, can you tell which one he loved and which one he hated? Also, one has darker skin than the other. All right. The Frida on the left, the European Frida, has lighter skin. Okay. So she is wearing a traditional Tijuana outfit. Is that right? Did I pronounce that right? This style became a cultural symbol for the revolutionaries. By dressing this way, she's identifying her Mexican identity and nationalism and feminism. She wore this style most of her life. One of the reasons is because it hid the fact that one leg was shorter than the other, caused by the polio when she was a child. And it also hid the back braces that she wore from her surgeries. And then she's also wearing the, is it huipil? Is that right? This sketch on the right was found in 2004, and it shows how she would wear the back brace under the dress that she wore. Now, in the figure on the right, she is holding a photograph of Diego as a child. And look at the, by the way, I don't think we got to. Both of these have their hearts exposed, and the hearts are connected by an artery going across. And there's also arteries coming down. There's another artery coming down into this photograph. And this artery is coming down and it's dripping blood. So the artery that's coming down into the photograph of Diego shows that he's a part of her life. Like without him, she would be missing something. She would be injured, right? If she were to cut that off. And then over here, the artery is dripping blood, and that's a symbol of femininity. And also, well, I'll get to the blood in a minute. But here is her parents right there. So the European Frida has an exposed heart, and the Mexican Frida, her heart, you can see just see the outside. And the European's Frida's heart is disconnected from Diego and it's bleeding. The European Frida is trying to stop the flow of blood through both hearts with the surgical forceps. And the blood is a symbol of womanhood and fertility. But blood is also very ingrained into Mexican history and culture. For example, the Catholics love to show bloody crucifixes to show the pain that Christ went through for us. And then also there's the bloody rituals of the Aztecs. So this is also a link to the Mexican history of Frida. And so while they are suffering and broken, they are supporting each other by holding hands. The connecting vein unites the loved and the unloved Frida, and the stronger heart supports the weaker one. This painting is about the duality of her identity and the complexities of a biracial identity that was a constant problem for her. And the background is quite simple. It helps us focus on the figures. In fact, the background looks to me a lot like the backgrounds of El Greco paintings. And then there's a couple of other paintings that are quite curious that Frida Kahlo likes. She commented on these, and she had seen these paintings in the Louvre. And it's quite possible that these paintings right here are influential of her two Frida's painting. So many of her paintings emulated ex votos. The images are reduced to bare essentials. And there's neither realism or is there any sort of perspective. And it's almost as if like they're sitting in front of a wall that's been painted like clouds. All right, our next painting is this self portrait with a thorn necklace and a hummingbird. She wears Christ's unraveled crown of thorns as a necklace that digs into her neck, and it shows herself as a Christian martyr. It also shows the pain in her life, the physical pain, and also the emotional pain with her failed relationships. Now, she has this bird around her neck. That's a little hummingbird. And that reminded me of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Anybody ever read that poem? He's a sailor on a ship and he kills an albatross, which is a really large seabird. And at that moment, all the other sailors on the ship drop dead. And he feels guilty about killing the albatross and he wears it around his neck. Later on in the story, the dead sailors get up from the dead and they're like zombies and they man the ship and it goes to shore. But having an albatross around your neck is it's a symbol of guilt. And when people say that that's an albatross, like for example, my car has so many problems, it's an albatross around my neck. You're meaning that it's a burden. So albatross around the neck is a burdensome issue, a problem that causes someone significant difficulties and prevents them from achieving their goals. But her hummingbird, that black hummingbird hanging around her neck, that's actually a symbol of good luck. It's a good luck charm in Mexico. It's a good luck charm for falling in love. But having the dead bird and the unraveled crown of thorns together, that's a lot of death imagery in this painting. Now, typically a symbol of good fortune, the meaning of a dead hummingbird is to be reversed. Frida Kahlo craves freedom. She wants to fly away from her problems and her pain, but she can't. And that dead bird around her neck has become an anchor preyed upon by the nearby cat. And the black cat is also a symbol of bad luck and death. The spider monkey is a symbol of evil. And Frida Kahlo often painted foliage around in the background to create a sense of claustrophobic space. But also leaves in nature is a symbol of female fertility. All right, and our last Kahlo painting is this one, Broken Column. And this was painted shortly after her spinal surgery. And you can see a broken ionic column that replaces her crumbling spine. And the column seems unstable and is about to collapse. The column is broken and in ruins. And this is kind of a message that the female body is both very powerful and fragile. And then she covers her lower body with hospital sheets. Now, that the straps that she wears around her is a reference to all of the corsets that she had to wear because of her surgeries. And those corsets, those photographs over there on the right, are the actual corsets that she wore. And they almost, like the white straps almost look like the straps that are on a hospital gurney. Here's another one of her corsets. And do you guys remember this painting over here on the left? Do you remember that he showed his pain and suffering through, it was emotional and mental pain that he was experiencing, not physical pain. But he showed it through a physical injury that he had. And that's what's going on in her. Not only does she feel physical pain, but she has a lot of emotional pain as well. Break down her center is like she's being split in two like an earthquake. And the landscape looks ripped apart by an earthquake. And the open body references her many surgeries. And the fractured column is a reference to the spinal surgery that she had. And then did you notice all the nails that are in her body? All right, and that also is a representation of her pain. And then she has these white tears coming down her face, much like the tears that come down the Madonna of a lot of depictions that are in Mexico. All right, I've got a quick story for you. We're going to go back to the Roman Empire. And this guy right here is the Emperor Diocletian. and he perceives Christians to be a threat, and he bans Christianity and he restricts a lot of the Christian freedoms. And this is a time of the persecution of the Christians. And let me introduce you to Sebastian. Sebastian was part of the Praetorian Guard of the Roman army, and these guys are the badasses of an already badass Roman army. And so the Praetorian Guard is very close to the emperor. But he was secretly a Christian, and he helped many other Christians escape horrible fates, and he converted a lot of people to Christianity. But his Christianity was discovered, and he was arrested. So he was taken to a field, tied to a tree, and shot with arrows. And there's a quote that says, "And the archers shot at him till he was as full of arrows as an urchin is full of pricks, and thus left him there for dead." So in the Renaissance, there are a lot of images of Saint Sebastian. And that's what we've got here, is that the nails that are sticking in her are like the arrows that are shot into Saint Sebastian. And she's connecting herself to Saint Sebastian. And then also the cloth that she has around her waist is similar to the cloth that we see in these older paintings of Jesus and people like Saint Sebastian, that covers up their privates. Now, I have three of her other paintings up here. If you were to look just at these paintings, just look at the paintings, what style of art would you say that those are? What style of modern art that we've studied would you say that those are? I heard surrealism, yeah, right? These are very dreamlike, aren't they? And they're very confusing, aren't they? All right, so some of her paintings have the elements of the bizarre and surreal, but she did not consider herself a surrealist. She disliked the science of dreams and the unconscious, and her paintings are not about the subconscious or the unconscious or the irrational juxtapositions. Once, when discussing the surrealists, she said, quote, "This cuckoo bunch of sons of bitches, the surrealists," unquote. She also said, quote, "While surrealists painted dreams, I painted my reality," unquote. And if you look at the one on the right, that deer with her head on it, notice that it also has a lot of arrows in it. That's another reference to Sebastian. All right, that will finish us for the art of Mexico in the 20th century. Are there any questions about anything that we've discussed? Any questions about the class? All right. Then the rest of the time is ours.